Okay, so as always, we're going to start off with the platform updates. So this is related to the updates that were released as part of April. Again, just for those that are new, just in case you're unaware of this, generally we update the Studio platform every 2 weeks. Okay, that's the idea. Sometimes we do it more frequently, sometimes we don't do it as frequently, just depends what's going on and what we need to get out and what time scales, and if there are things which are urgent from a customer point of view, that might be sort of moved. But the idea with the platform is we can update it in small pieces very frequently. So we aim for every couple of weeks, but sometimes it's a little bit outside that. So what significant updates from maybe your point of view have we actually released? So the first thing that we've released, so this is all activity focused because that's where we've been putting the majority of our effort, is you can now actually limit the number of retries on activities. So for those that are familiar with activities, whether they be questions or whether they be automated activities, you could enable retries or not. So if you couldn't retry it, you got one go and that was it. If you could retry it, it was effectively unlimited. Okay, so now you can say they can retry it and they can try twice or 3 times or 4 times, whatever the number is that you might want to put in the box that basically pops up. So really popular request that one's been. So we've now enabled that, and so that's in the platform today and something that you can use. The second thing, which actually is quite minor, but it's actually something that's for years has sort of poked my OCD, my obsessive compulsive disorders, that we've actually finally fixed. It is one of those things that's more cosmetic than anything else, but I think it's from a user experience point of view, it's quite important. And for those that have used automated activities, you'll be familiar with the sort of the green tick or the red warning triangle. And in the March Lab Developer Workshop, we talked about customizing the message that gets returned as part of that. Okay, and one of the things you would have seen in the March Lab Developer Workshop, and I'm sure some of you have seen, is the fact that if the text is actually wider than the screen, then we will just split based on the character and continue. So we will split words. We won't think about make sure that we move the whole word to the next line. We will just split it in the middle. Okay, so before this update was pushed, something like the response box here, you can see the word similarity is actually split across 2 lines. Okay, we don't do that anymore. From an update that was pushed in August, we now sort of wrap the text correctly, thinking about the lines and where we put the line breaks and all those sort of things. So small cosmetic change, but actually I think from the user's point of view, it's quite an important and significant change. Okay, so they're really the key things that that we've released this month that you're going to see, and they're going to sort of impact you. Yeah, brilliant, Andrew. Thank you very much. That's really great feedback, and it is, it's something which, it's not earth-shattering, but actually it's quite important, and I'm really glad we've actually got round to fixing that. If you do things like Cloud Labs, I haven't got any slide on this, but I'll just mention this, which is quite important. We've made some changes to Cloud Lab environments, specifically with respect to Azure, when building virtual machine-based Azure labs. Before, you didn't really have any control on things like disk type. Okay, so now when you're building Azure-based virtual machines using the virtual machine profile, for Azure Labs, you can now specify whether you want the disk to be standard hard disk, standard SSD, or premium SSD. So effectively allowing you to control how much you're going to spend, because obviously the faster the disk, the more the virtual machine costs you, and B, the performance of the machine, because the performance of the disk can have a big impact on actually the performance of the software and that inside the machine. So it puts you in control of balancing cost with performance. The other thing that's also improved in that space, excuse me, is we also now support the use of the Azure hybrid benefit. So this, again, if you build Azure-based virtual machines, can actually, again, have a big impact on cost. Okay, so for those that are not familiar, Microsoft have a licensing program which can include what we call the Azure hybrid benefit. If you've got the Azure hybrid benefit, what that means is you can effectively use on-premise Windows licenses in Azure. Okay, so the idea being, when you go and buy a Windows server from Azure, you don't have to pay the fee for the OS, because you're effectively saying, by ticking the box that says I'm going to use the Azure hybrid benefit, I'm using one of my on-premise licenses, and therefore you get about a 40% reduction in the cost of that virtual machine. Okay, just like in Azure, our platform, it's just a box you tick. Okay, and it is your legal responsibility to understand whether you're allowed to tick the box or not. So the box, every customer can tick the box in Azure. It just, and it just depends whether they're breaking the license agreement or not. Okay, that you have with Microsoft, and it's the same in our platform. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So very platform specific, those ones. So that's why I not put a slide, but just thought it was worth just calling those out as well for people that might use those, which I appreciate might not be the majority of you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is not released yet. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to give you a heads up about this, and then this will actually lead into what's going to be May's Lab Developer Workshop. Okay, so hopefully during May, we was meant to actually release this in April, but we found a couple of bugs, and you'll see one of the bugs when I do my demonstration in a moment. Okay, we're going to release what we call multiple instruction sets. This is absolutely V1 of the technology, and we've got a V2, in terms of on our roadmap of what we're planning to do. But we would also love to hear from customers that see this and think, actually, I would like to use this way, or I would like to use this that way. So it would be fantastic if once this gets released and you play with this technology, that you put some ideas into our feedback site. So feedback.skillable.com. And think about ways that you might want to be able to use this. So this is about being able to have multiple sets of instructions attached to a single lab profile. Okay, so we have a couple of use cases which we have in place for V1, and of course you can use it outside of those use cases as well, but that's what V1's been designed for. We have some ideas of what V2 is going to look like. But we would love, obviously, at that point, customers to really drive ideas and use cases for us. So I'll give you a little demo of this in a moment. It's not in production, but I'll use our UAT system. But I just want to talk about the sort of use cases. So the first primary use case we're putting this down with is multiple languages. Okay, so you've got a lab profile, and you want effectively exactly the same lab profile, but you want it in 3 or 4, 5 different languages. Okay, so rather than actually have 3, 4, 5 different lab profiles and you've got to maintain them and all those things, you can have one lab profile and you can just have the languages all available inside the same lab profile. Okay, another use case scenario is actually creating lab instructions maybe for different levels of difficulty. Okay, so imagine having a beginner, an intermediate, an advanced, and an expert. So actually the lab's the same, but the way you write the instructions are going to be different. Okay, so I'll show you this feature in a moment. Okay, just a really basic stuff. Okay, because we're going to do a lab developer workshop on this. Today, this feature can only be accessed via API. Okay, so this is only available for our customers that are doing API launches, and of course they would need to modify their API integration with us to take advantage of this. We will be updating the TMS, so the TMS will be able to take advantage of this. So there will be some options available there. Okay, and so as I say, we have got some ideas for new features that we're going to have going down the line, but we would love your feedback on those. So before I talk about new features, let me show you what this looks like and where we are with it today. And then we can go on from there. Let me just find the appropriate page. Okay, so hopefully I'll just drag this across. Okay, so this is our UAT system. Okay, so if I was just to go and create a new lab profile, okay, so I'm just going to create a sort of custom environment, LG, LDW, DW, multiple instruction sets. Okay, so I'm just going to, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to press save here. Actually, I was going to set this to none just so that there's less stuff about. Okay, but effectively, you know, it doesn't look any different. It just looks like a lab profile. It looks exactly the same as what you've already seen. And actually, that's one of the things that you will initially notice when we deploy this feature to production. Okay, you won't actually notice any core differences until you start taking advantage of this. Okay, however, there is something I'd like to point out. Now, I could show you on this screen, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the profile. There is one thing that you will notice. So I've got another profile here. Okay, so this one is from our production system. Okay, so this is live now. So if I edit that profile as well, you will notice there is a difference on the basic page. Okay, this is what you're used to. And the key thing to notice here, we have a language field. Okay, so you've got the ability to pick the language that you want the lab client to be in and what you're effectively saying the instructions and that are written in this particular lab. Notice there is no language field here. Okay, there is no language field. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of point that out. So that's one thing you will notice as a difference. And that's because the languages are now stored as part of the instructions themselves. Okay, so let me hit edit instructions. Okay, all seems to be pretty similar, pretty standard to what we've had in the past. Okay, except we now have this new little menu here. Okay, so this is the sort of bit for managing multiple instructions. So let me just be really boring. Okay, so we're going to sit here and go, this is the English instructions. Okay, so really, really boring. Okay, and just why I'm in here, I'm just going to point out, you know, one of the new things that we've got. Because if you think about the fact that we've got the same lab profile and it could be in different languages, how do I know what language is maybe been launched and things along those lines? So we have some new @labs. Okay, so new @lab tokens. So we now have a new language code, we have a language name, and we have a language region code. Okay, so if I go and put language code in there and I go and do @lab, oops, dot language name, you will now see one of the bugs. Okay, they don't work, because you can actually see on the right hand side I've got the @labs being rendered. Okay, it's not setting those values correctly. Okay, so that's one of the things we've got to fix. Funny enough, it just doesn't fix it on English. It just doesn't display them on English. Okay, okay, so I've got my English instructions. I've wrote those whatever I want them to be. Okay, so I then want a second set of instructions. So let's assume language to start with. Okay, so what I can do here is I can come up here and I can choose to manage my instruction sets. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to create new instruction sets. So I can come along here and I can either create a new blank instruction set, or I can choose to clone from an existing set, and I can then pick effectively the set that I want to clone from in here. Obviously, there's only one option, so it doesn't really give me any choices. So I can then press OK, and it will basically take a copy of that instruction set. Obviously, they can have a different title. So notice here, the lab title, I can change the name of the lab title. So I can make sure the lab title for the, in this case, let's say the Spanish instructions is in Spanish. So the title that appears at the top right-hand corner is in the correct localized language. Okay, so, but we'll just go with that at the moment. I'm not going to change anything else here, and I'm just going to go and press OK. Okay, And what we can see, I've got the English version here, but hopefully now if I go and switch to the Spanish version, okay, you can actually see I've got the Spanish version and you see it's actually rendered those tags correctly. Okay, now of course what it doesn't do is it doesn't translate the text for you, so you'd have to go and obviously do the translation yourself. Having said that, we have got one of the things that's on our roadmap is a tick box to say translate the content. Okay, so we are looking as one of the possible options where it would go and do certainly an initial computer-based translation. Okay, we all know computer-based translations are not perfect, but it might get you 80% there, and you just need a proofreader to go in there and resolve those issues and things. Okay. So that would be an example of maybe where we're using these for different languages. But of course, I can do exactly the same in the fact that if I come back to the English version, what I might actually do is I, again, might use the English version, create a new instruction set. I'm still going to clone it from the English ones. And this time it's actually going to be my, advanced instructions. Okay, so these are still going to be English. Okay, and they're going to be my advanced instructions. Just as an example, and I could obviously, so this is where I could have maybe the different levels of instruction connected to the same labs as examples. Okay, so then of course I've actually got sort of three. Really should have obviously gone and changed that to a different name rather than English or whatever, but ultimately I could have changed that. Maybe I would actually use the base set names and things to change that, but I can do that. A couple of other features which are worth just highlighting here. You can stop instructions from being editable, so you can sort of seal them if you wanted to. Now, of course, someone with the appropriate permissions can come in here and just slide that slider. But the idea with this really, so this is quite an interesting feature, is one of the things I can do is I can turn the organization on. Okay, oops, sorry, and it shows me the organization that owns these. And what I can do is I can actually assign instructions to different organizations. So imagine, for example, you think that everyone knows that we have Microsoft Labs. We sell Microsoft Labs to Microsoft training partners. It's one of our business models. So just imagine, for example, Microsoft actually building all their labs on our platform, and then what they allow customers to do is have their own copy of the instructions. So the lab's owned by Microsoft, but they clone the instructions for one of their customers. Okay, and then they say to that customer, you can edit the instructions. So you can't edit the environment, but what you can do is you can edit the instructions. So what they might then go and do is they might go and change the names of things or certain parts of text to make it more applicable to the people they're training. So they might go and do those sort of things. Okay, so that's what we're allowing. So you think about our challenge labs. This is key for our challenge labs. We've got customers now that say, love the challenge labs, but actually I'd like to be able to change the scenario text so I can make it sound like, you work for PLH Global. In PLH Global, they have the following business requirements. Can you go off and create an Azure storage account that will match those criteria, for example? So actually the lab's the same, but you can just personalize it is maybe a great way. So these are sort of some of the use case scenarios and some of the things that we're doing. But as I say, these can only be accessed via API. So because there's some complexity there, we do actually show you what the correct API command would be for launching a particular instruction set and things. And if you don't specify those parameters, we would obviously just launch whatever the default one is. Okay, whichever one's been defined as the default. Okay. So just wanted to sort of give you a little clue there in terms of this feature that's coming. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the options and choices and features in the May Lab Developer Workshop, and obviously give you some sort of exposure to this. But that's multiple instruction sets, so you more than likely see that start to appear before the next Lab Developer Workshop. Okay. So has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask about any of those?
I have a question, it's Andrew. You obviously said that it's API now and that you're looking to do some level of TMS update for that. Will the concept be almost like sections where the user would be able to choose whether I want to do, for example, a basic or an advanced, or is this going to be outside of user-based control?
Okay, so the actual implementation has not been decided, but I would see there's going to be two possible use case scenarios. Okay, so option one, it would be, when you add the labs, when you're on the activities page, at that point, as the course author, you could choose what you want to add. And therefore the user just gets to press the launch button. So that's use case one I see. Use case two, where we would have in the TMS, is where effectively there are choices. So let's say, for example, there's different languages. It would be a drop down effectively next to where the launch button is. So the user could pick the configuration they wanted to launch before they press the launch button. Does that make sense?
Right, but it would be, you're just choosing one and going with it. It's not something that you would be able to modify live, right? Is that the idea?
No, absolutely. That's correct. You basically got to make your decision before you launch.
Okay.
Cool. Okay.
I like it.
But no, perfect. But that's a really great thing. You're going to lead me into something there, but I just want to make sure no one else has got any questions before I talk about the future in terms of where some of the things we see with this.
Yeah. I have some ideas already.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, just because I'm about to mention these ideas, okay, please don't assume these are 100% set in concrete. As anything with any product, ideas change, development changes. So if you think actually that would be brilliant, okay, I would still recommend that you go and generate a feedback item for it, because if our development team know that actually Paul's been talking about this and actually these customers would like to see that feature, A, that'll prioritize it, and B, it ensures it stays on the roadmap. So sorts of things that we are considering in future versions. Okay, so the first thing will actually be the ability for the user to change the instructions within the lab that's been launched. Okay, so that's maybe not so applicable for the language type scenario, but that could be certainly more applicable to the like the levels, like the guided, intermediate, I've launched advanced and it's too advanced for me, let me drop back to intermediate type scenario. So that's one thing that's under consideration. Number two, think of another scenario. So imagine, for example, you've written a Linux lab, okay, and actually you've got an Ubuntu version and you've got a Red Hat version and you've got an X and a Y version. Okay, so imagine being able to select, well, I'd like to do the Ubuntu version, and what actually happens is you get the Ubuntu instructions with an Ubuntu VM. The other VMs are not there, even though they're in the lab profile. We actually change the VMs that you access based on the instruction set you select. So the resources on the left-hand side change based on the instruction set. You compare the two together, okay? So this VM for these instruction sets, this VM for that instruction set, okay? So, again, so if you had that sort of lab today, which you could build, what you've actually got is you've got 4 VMs in the lab profile, and the user sort of has to go to the right one. But of course, from a billing point of view, you get charged for 4 VMs, okay, even though they only use one of the 4. Okay, so there could be some things that way. And of course, that model would work even if you were saying, well, did you want to do this on Windows or did you want to do this on Linux? Okay, so that could be those sort of things. Other things, so at the moment, activities span across all the instruction sets. So we're actually going to talk about activities. And of course, you can control what activities are in what instruction sets. But we are also going to look at being able to build per instruction set activities. Okay. Now, in reality, if the labs are the same, then you more than likely want, especially for automated activities, so the scripted ones, the same activity in every set of instructions, because we have these new AtLab tokens. If I've got any messages that feed data back to the user, I can work out what set of instructions they're using and make sure that my script returns the correct language response. You know, here's the Spanish response, here's the English response, and so on and so forth. The other thing that we're looking at is automated translation. So imagine, for example, when you come in here, when you sort of say, I want to do an instruction set and I'm going to clone, then having a box that says automatically translate as well. Okay, that will of course use machine-based translation, so it's more likely going to get you 70 to 80% there, and then you've got to proofread and finish off and those sort of things to get there as well. So they are some of the things we're thinking about, you know, we're considering. You know, sure, there's lots more ideas that some of you might have as well. You know, so certainly, you know, getting involved with this, because this is a hot topic for us at the moment. You know, this is something you can have a big impact and influence on, and really evolve how this changes. So hopefully this little sneak peek has been worthwhile. You should see it appear during May, and the Lab Developer Workshop will be on this as well. Okay, so hopefully that's been useful for you. We're sort of really excited about that. We think that's going to be quite a key new feature. Cool. Obviously, kind of questions. If anyone's thought of any other questions about any of the other features or anything, then obviously throw them in a chat, or you can just interrupt me if you want. As always, keep an eye on the release notes. You know, always sort of redirect people to the release notes page, so you can see what we've released and things. Always really, really valuable.